Welcome, Leo, to your in-depth monthly forecast for March 2025. When we're all on form, it gives us the enthusiasm to push out, to do things in a more enterprising and adventurous way. When we're not feeling so good, we tend to be a little more protective. But because your sign is ruled exclusively in the zodiac by the sun, which is at the heart of all our existence, when you're really in the mood to do something dramatic, then that's something to behold. And this month we have the start of the astrological new year that occurs on the 20th, and it does see the sun as it enters the sign of Aries with the vernal equinox align with Venus, the planet of relating but also of money. Now there is a bit of a catch, Leo, because Venus is in retrograde, which begins on the 2nd. Venus is also not quite at its best in the sign of Aries, but I feel that event, which is the start of the new year, the astrological year, does give you a flavour of what lays in wait, because towards the end of this month we have the final solar eclipse in the sign of Aries in a series which has been going on for the last couple of years. But that particular event really can give you a backdrop for the following 6 months, because your ruler, the sun, is exalted in the sign of Aries to really turn up the glow, the afterburners, when it comes to mesmerizing people with your confidence, your flair, and your passion. But you know, that fiery energy, that enthusiasm, the preparedness to take on new possibilities has to compete with a complex set of energies that are emanating from the sign of Pisces, which of course is a water sign, and water is much more emotional. And right at the start of this month, tucked up behind Venus but late bunched up in Pisces, is the trio of Mercury, the communicator, but also the planet of precision, Neptune, the planet of dreams and mysticism, but also the North Node, which is like the collective direction of travel for us all at the moment, asking us to become much more conscious of what our fears, anxieties, and more subconscious motivations are about. So as you come into this month, there's part of you that may be wanting to be more adventurous. Mercury's going to move into Aries on the 3rd, and that certainly could get you thinking about destinations if you're planning a vacation or some higher education, or you want to retrain, or you just want to be more spontaneous. But remember Venus in that retrograde. Ironically, Venus and Mercury are going to be collaborating really well at the start of this month, as will Venus and Jupiter, the two planets of fortune. So one area that can work well for you at the start of March is your connections to friends, particularly friends that share your values or you really enjoy being with, but in a very free way, not necessarily a particularly structured way, where you can just lift your phone, give someone a ring, and just in a very spontaneous way arrange to meet up and go out and have a nice time. So those kind of energies definitely emphasised at the start of this month. But I feel it is important to understand that the nudge towards doing something different, more engaging, is asking you to understand what Venus in Aries is about. Venus in Aries is very much in its opposition to the sign it rules of Libra, which is about harmony. Venus in Aries is much more about doing what we want. But for you, the 9th house represents the point of truth. So if there is a personal relationship, even a business relationship, which isn't going very well, the truth of the matter will need to be faced this month, particularly if you're not aligned around things like intimacy, shared finance, or even financial planning for the future. Because in week 2 of this month, we are going to see a beautiful link between Mercury and Venus for sure, which can bring possibilities, particularly around a contract, but it needs to be absolutely watertight correct. And that's because on the 12th, the Saturn Cazimi is going to highlight any dissatisfaction you have where you feel you've put everything in and you've been very committed and invested emotionally, intimately, financially. If there's something that feels cool and not working for you, the freedom agenda of Venus and Mercury at this point of the month in Aries could see you thinking about the concept of escape, because the ninth house can be about freedom and individuality. It's not necessarily about devotion and connections, which is what that very powerful energy between the Sun and Saturn. And remember, the Sun is your ruler. So Saturn is going to bring a very cold, realistic, and perhaps very challenging energy to your situation this month. So if you're over optimistic with the Venus and Mercury energy initially, and knowing that you've got that spring equinox coming and the solar eclipse in Aries later in the month and Neptune moving into Aries too, it could see you be a little bit too quick to assume that everything will just go as you wish. So how do you deal with that Sun-Saturn energy? I think it really is looking some concerns directly in the eye, and it may mean becoming much more informed. The ninth house, I feel, particularly around finance and Venus and Mercury, the communicator, which itself goes retrograde mid-month, is asking you really to perhaps gain more insight, and that could come from a life coach, business consultant, it may come from an experienced friend, it could even come from some kind of counselling, because the 8th house is where we get beneath the surface of a situation, but the 9th house is where we have the openness to receive new ways of looking at things. So that brings us to the lunar eclipse of the 14th of March. It's the second in a series that began last September with the, at that time, lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces. But this one has Saturn sat right on the Sun. And because for you, the position of the moon is in house 2, that's everyday money, but it's also your self-worth, your values. And that's competing where you connect to somebody else. So this 9th house energy, which emerges from the 20th, then has to compete with the fact that Mars, the planet of thrust, which rules the sign of Aries, actually forges a very interesting link with Uranus in week 3. And if you did want to do something completely different and you were prepared to be very experimental, perhaps even a tad risk-taking, you could do something very dramatically that works out well for you. So with Venus inverting in its retrograde back into Pisces on the 27th, you may find yourself having to revisit something that you had high hopes for right at the start of the month before Venus went retrograde, with that combination of Mercury, Neptune and the North Node. Then we have the solar eclipse. There's definitely an opportunity there to break out and do some very daring things over the next 6 months. But I feel that it needs to work financially for you, it needs to work with your values, it needs to work with who you're collaborating with. But I feel for some Leos, if you feel locked into a situation that is choking off your ability to be truly yourself, this could be a month when you actually need to escape. Now the escape could be from a particular pattern of being. It may be escaping from some fearfulness about doing something different. It could be escaping from a job which may be well paid but not very fulfilling, or it could be escaping from a relationship which feels very controlling. But you may need to ask yourself the question, are you being a little controlling, perhaps towards yourself with that Saturn Cazimi, or is it someone else who's applying their leverage and coercion to you? Because by the end of this month, Mercury is going to invert back along with Venus into your 8th house. So I feel that as then Neptune steps forwards to join up with Aries, where it's going to be for the next 8 months, if there's something for you that's fundamentally choking off a need for a deep connection or a deep meaning, and the way forwards is actually being much more in touch with what you want to do as an individual, rather than honouring something that's shackling you in a way that's not good for your mental or psychological well-being, then that's the big question this month. So any situation which is stopping you really breathing in the oxygen of life in a way which really helps you to demonstrate the full range of your radiance, that's what you need to be looking about changing. And that's not always easy, particularly if we're locked into quite complex relationships, especially around money, maybe where we live, maybe there's shared resources, or even things like children, animals. These things can create a lot of complication. But if you do feel that you're not really living your life on your terms and values, this is going to be a month which challenges you and pushes you to do something that's much more daring. If you've yet to check out my new website, please go to www.patrickarundell.com. You can grab yourself my special offer of your combination reports, of your life roadmap report, the most important document anyone could ever read, that helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our existence so far, but also your 12 months transit report as well. And there's 30% off. Each of these is totally unique to the person it's produced for. If you don't know your time, you can have my solar option. If you prefer to have whole sign, you can choose that. Or if you'd like to check out your draconic possibilities, your soul chart, you can also get any of those 30% off too. Please see the link below for more.